We have concluded up to chapter 23 the following. I would like to actually read the text, the introduction to chapter 24, and then add some. So I'm reading on page 320. In chapter 18, the Alter Rebbe began to explain how it is very near and accessible to each of us to serve God out of feeling of love and awe by means of awakening the hidden love latent in us all. To clarify how this hidden love can lead to the observance of all the mitzvot, the Alter Rebbe proceeded to discuss the relationship of all the mitzvot to the precepts of the belief in God's unity and to the prohibition against idolatry. The unity of God, as explained, means not only that there is but one God, rather that God is the only existing being and all else is contained within him. Conversely, idolatry does not necessarily mean a denial of God's existence or of his being unique. Any assertion that something exists beyond and separate from God also constitutes idolatry. In chapter 23, the Alter Rebbe went on to state that through Torah and mitzvot, in which the divine will stands revealed, one reaches the perfect union with God. In this chapter, he explains that a transgression has exactly the opposite effect of a mitzvah. Whereas a mitzvah joins one to God, a transgression severs one from him. Whereas a mitzvah attests to God's unity, a transgression implies idolatry. And now let me explain. Chapter 18 began by the Rebbe explaining that there is no such thing as anything outside of God. We all are part of God. And therefore, anytime a man disobeys God, deviates from God's order, they are separating themselves. And on a spiritual level, they are idol worshippers. Spiritually, that's what idol worshiping means, to separate oneself from God. In chapter 22, the Rebbe explains the exact opposite of going away from God, explaining that there are two ways in which we create a very strong bond and we unite with God through the mitzvot and the Torah. The mitzvot, says the Rebbe, are like a body that contains many body parts. When I do a mitzvah with giving tzedakah, I do a mitzvah with prayer with my mouth, I do a mitzvah with walking to synagogue, with eating kosher. I am an extension of God's body part, the hand, the mouth, the feet. So I, by serving God, am actually enabling God's pleasure to be achieved by my activity. I am part of God, body part of God. Then the second half of the chapter, the Rebbe spoke about the study of Torah. It's not body part of God, but the essence of God. We did not talk about different powers of the human, but one of them is the intelligence, the power of intelligence, which is the essence of a human being. When I study Torah, my unity with God is far greater than being part of God's extension of God's body part. So we are, by doing a mitzvah, like studying Torah is a mitzvah, we are an extension of God. By studying Torah, the Torah we actually attain the essence of God, which is far greater than mitzvot. And that's why someone who dedicate their life completely for the study of Torah, not just an hour a day, but all day, they are exempt from most of the mitzvot, simply because they attain the unity, the bonding with God, far greater degree by studying Torah than performing the mitzvot. So far, so good. This chapter 24, the rabbi is going to deal with the negativity. Before I share with you the negativity, I'm going to give you some type of few words that help us connect to the chapter. The idea that we discovered is that humility, humbleness, is the only vessel to contain godliness. We shared before that God will not rest under the same roof with someone who is haughty, someone who feels proud of themselves and their greatness. There are many words that are synonymous with nullification and humbleness versus to feel one himself. One example is there is a boss. You have a governor of the country. You have the head of the household. You have a teacher. You have a rabbi. You have a king. Everybody else obeys the boss, the commander-in-chief in the army. You have the chief of staff. You have generals. Each one is responsible. What happens if a soldier or a member of the household do not accept the authority or the rulership of the master, of the chief, of the person in charge? There is a breaking of the entire system. Same is about body and body parts. My body is in unison with my head. When I want to walk, when I want to sit down, when I want to turn around, my body walks together completely, following and obeying my desire. Now, what happens if one body part decides to disobey? It's not going to. It's going to take its time. We call it that body part is sick, needs attention, needs healing. That's what happens. So if my hand, it's too hard to lift the hand when I want to, or I feel the hand, what happens? The sign of ailment is you only feel body parts, right? When you don't feel your body, you're perfect. When you get sick, what happens? You feel sick in your stomach, in your head, in your nose, etc. You start feeling the body parts. That means the breaking of the unity. In Kabbalistic terminology, it reflects God and us. Well, I am God's body part, I'm an extension of God. The idea is that I'm none. I don't exist. It's not about me, how I feel, what I achieve, how great I am. It's about giving instead of taking. So a body part that is felt, my foot, my legs, my toenails, it means it needs attention. It's not able to, it's not well. When I have a human, as a human being, when I feel myself, I'm looking for accolades, I'm looking to be rewarded, I want to be better than anybody else. What we do actually is I feel myself, and that's an ailment. That's a sickness in the system, because the system is that we should all be dedicated to God and serve God. It's all about giving and not about taking. It's all about the mission, and it's not about what's in it for me. The rabbi this week, in this chapter, I believe we won't do it in 1 week, hopefully in 2 weeks, the rabbi, in 2 lessons, the rabbi is going to talk about the source and the cause of sin. The cause of sin is self-awareness, just like in a body part. As soon as I feel, as soon as I want, as soon as I deserve, as soon as what's in it for me, it is a pathway that leads away farther from God, and therefore all the creepy crawlies, the desire to do evil is created. So again, we go back. The best container, the best way to achieve greatness between men and men and God is humility. When one practices, that's the main goal of the Tanya, and that's the best medicine for all ailments. Relationship between parents and children, relationship between husband and wife, relationship between employer and employees, relationship between neighbors. When one practices humility a little bit, they are creating a vessel, a container that can hold God's blessing. I want to show you an example. I have many examples, but I'm not that great. And thank God I'm sharing only examples in a positive, not in the negative. Because when I did not behave properly, I have many other examples, which I don't care to share. But when I came to town, I moved here in 1990, November of 1990, and I wanted to have a big Hanukkah party in December. So I figured I will connect with the Jewish Community Center, the JCC, because that's the center where Jewish people go to celebrate. But all my friends, every single one of them said, do not connect with the JCC. They hate Chabad. In fact, they already filed a lawsuit against Chabad 2 years before I came. There was a Chabad rabbi who left town because they sued. They took to court Chabad and won in court in Tampa. But I said I take every Jew at face value. I do not like to judge people, prejudge. I'll go and have a meeting with the guy. I want to hear the person say to me, no, I don't want you to have a party here. I called up the head of the JCC. Today is one of my greatest friends, Dan Bernstein. Nobody knows him here. Heidi, do you remember Dan Bernstein? No. And I called him for a meeting. As I walk into a meeting, I was, as they call it, a fisher. I was only 22 at the time. He was in his 40s, running a budget of $2.5 million. I just came to town. I'm virtually almost homeless with 2 little children that I didn't know how I'm going to pay for the formula or the diapers. And I walked in and I says, look, I represent the Jewish community. I'm a Chabad, and I would like to have a Hanukkah party in this place, and perhaps we can do it jointly. So he turned to me and he said, what do you have in mind? I says, I don't know, but I want to bring Jewish pride. I want to celebrate Hanukkah. So he said, let me call my assistant. Her name was Annette Goodman. And she will be able to tell us what we can do and what not to do. And I felt right away that he was looking for a way to get away because he did not like Orthodox Jew. So Annette came to the office while I'm there. And she said, what do you have in mind? I says, well, I can assemble few children to have a choir, children's choir, singing Jewish melodies everybody loves. And she said to me, no, we have our own children. So I said, okay, so you can have your own choir. She says, but I don't have anybody teaching them Jewish songs. All the teachers in the preschool were not Jewish. So I said, okay, so I'm willing to give our children who come to the celebration, we'll give them a free menorah. No, we cannot give gifts. I don't want it's competing with us. So I figured that the best thing to do is to get quiet, not to say anything, which was very against every vein in my body, because all I wanted is do, but I realized that whatever I said, they were attacking. So I turned to them and I said, look, I'm here. Tell me how we can celebrate Hanukkah. Tell me what do you want to do? And the room got quiet for at least a minute. And then he turned to me and he says, I see you are a great, great rabbi, the best rabbi. This is a different experience than I ever had. I would like to work with you. And from that moment on, we became very close friends. So close that he would give us the facility, he would pay some expenses. We did together projects. There was a lot of working. I feel that all the years I said that the turning point was when I said, instead of fighting, I will take a step back and say, you tell me what you want and we will do it. And we did a Hanukkah party, actually. 400 people came and I stood there with the tefillin to put on for people. I built a dreidel house. I don't know if anybody knows what a dreidel house. You've not seen a dreidel house. I bought yeshiva boys to man. It became such a great success that we did a matzah bakery. We got public school kids. JCC paid for it, busing all the kids. Sixth and seventh graders would come in from every public school in town just to experience matzah. All started. No, it's here on the. I got carried away. All I wanted to point is that when you practice humility, it bonds. It's a magic crazy glue. It's a crazy glue. It makes a bond between people and between us and God. Every single time, adversary, relatives, when one practices a little humility, that's what bonds us. That's what connects us. Back to the discussion with God. When you have a person who disobeys God, it means that they are not well. And that's what the rabbi is going to share with us in this chapter. The chapter is going to address 4 different points. The first one is how the breaking of the relationship between us and God is created through sin. What happens when someone sins? Number 2 is, why is this something that is a sin for me is not a sin for a non-Jew? If I go and eat shellfish or I eat non-kosher food, it's a sin. It's a barrier between me and God. A non-Jew does the same, and there is no sin. They did not break the relationship with God. Number 3, the idea that a sinner is actually someone who rebels against God, and there is no difference between idol worshiping, meaning denying completely God, versus committing a sin, a small sin. And number 4 is why sin? What causes a human to sin? And we discussed before, there has to be an equal free choice, meaning we need to have both sides equally. Otherwise, it's no big deal to do a mitzvah. But where does it come from, the idea to commit a sin and stay away from God? Yes.
A question regarding kosher food. If a non-Jew person eats kosher food, does that benefit him more than him consuming normal food that he does?
The answer is no. In fact, the study of Torah for a non-Jew does not benefit in any special way. The non-Jew has 7 commandments, and if they obey those commandments, they get rewarded and they are bonded with God equal to a Jew. So if I study Torah, I'm connected with God. If a non-Jew cares about safety in his neighborhood and adhere to the law and order, they are bonded with God. They are doing what God had sent them for, and therefore they are rewarded in the same way. Here is the beginning of the chapter. We are on page 320. We're starting from the text. Since everything in the realm of holiness has its counterpart in the unholy realms of the Sitra Acha, the other side, there is also an unholy counterpart to the observance of the mitzvot and to Torah study, which produce union with God. The counterpart is the 365 prohibitions stated in the Torah and all the rabbinical prohibitions, since they are contrary to and the very opposite of God's will and wisdom, says the Rebbe, just like the yin and the yang, the black and white, the light and darkness. You must have 2 opposites continuously. So you have a way to bond with God by refraining from eating not kosher, by studying Torah, by observing Shabbat. You also have a way equally to separate yourself from God by disobeying God, by not eating kosher, by not keeping Shabbat, by not studying Torah. They represent total and complete separation from his unity and oneness. They are the same as the Sitra Acha and the Klipot, which are called idolatry and other gods. Since the internal aspect of the divine will is concealed from them, as explained above, that they receive the life force from the hinder part of the divine will, the level of Achoraim, and for this reason they are called Elokim Acherim, other gods. We discussed before about throwing stuff behind your back. So the other gods, or the opposite of godliness, receives their sustenance from God. They are created for a purpose. The purpose is to create challenges for the human. When someone gives in and succumb to their desires and are looking for disobeying God, they derive their sustenance not from godliness, but from the opposite of godliness. Just as the forbidden actions themselves represent separation from godliness, so too the three garments of a Jew's animal soul, which stems from the klipa of Noga, namely the thought, speech, and action that are clothing, that is, that think, speak, or act is in violation of the 365 Torah prohibitions or any of the rabbinic injunctions, and similarly the essence of the soul itself, which is clothed in its garments, since it is the soul itself, after all, which thinks, speaks, and acts through its garments. The faculties of thought, speech, and action, all of them become completely united with this sitra achra and klipa called avodah zarah, that is idolatry. There was a non-Jew in Russia who once put out for sale a pair of tefillin. Do you know what tefillin is? Have you seen tefillin? Everybody seen tefillin? So a Jew sees him in the flea market selling a box of tefillin, a pair of tefillin. And he figured that man must have stolen it from another Jew. Otherwise, how would he have in his possession tefillin? So he turned to the guy and he says, "What is this?" He says, "What? These are leather boxes." And he says, "What do you do with them? How did you get them?" And the guy says, "What do you mean?" He says it in Russia, "Sam Sapochnik." I am the one, the Leatherman, right? I created it. Huh? I'm a shoe, right. Sam Sapochnik. It's a very famous phrase among Hasidim. In other words, we always think that we know best, that we are in charge, just like that Russian farmer said Sam Sapochnik, and he did the tefillin boxes, and not realizing that it's obvious, have nothing to do with them, and it's for sure that he stole it from someone's house, and he had no idea what they represent. I have seen also women walking with a handbag that was actually a talis bag that they stole from somebody, and they walk around putting their perfumes and whatever toiletry in the subway in New York. There are very famous stories of that. What? These boxes. I'm asking you, a goy can build tefillin? He has nothing else better to do with leather?
That thing is, he stole the boxes. He certainly didn't have anything written inside them. Must have just got the leather boxes. There's probably no Hebrew writing on it. He's just a shoemaker or something to put together a bunch of boxes.
Do you think he knows there is something inside?
I'm sure he knew there was nothing inside.
So someone should buy it and open up and make sure to give it to be checked, no doubt. But when he was asked, where did you get it? What is this for? He says, what do you mean? I did it myself. It's a joke, right? That's the same idea of a human being. When we get involved in activities and part of the universe that we have no clue, and in fact, we should stay away from. Says the Rebbe, this is what idolatry. Idolatry is disobeying God. Idolatry is denying God. If I can go out and, as a Jew, eat something not kosher, what I do is I go to God and I say, I know how to live a life in the most pleasurable, best way possible. Well, I have no clue. I really don't have any clue. I read on many, there are many famous stories to that effect. We had in a jail about 2 years ago, a story of a terrorist attack in a town of, I think, Ashdod, or in the south of Israel. The man, I think it was on Passover, on the Seder, there was a terrorist attack, and the man who was severely injured, he was taken to the hospital. when they ran the MRI, they discovered that he had a cancer in the brain, a tumor. And just in the nick of times, they were able to detect it, save it, and operate on him and save him. Had there not been a terrorist attack, he wouldn't have been discovered. Would have, by the time it would have been discovered, he would have come and talk about migraines. It would be because Israelis are tough guys. So they probably suffered a long time, but he felt that, he dismissed that. And by the time he would have gone to the hospital after he fainted or something, it would be too late. The stories like that happen all the time. And the reason is because God runs the show. So for me to come and say, I know how to live a life, and my plan is in ways that is contrary to God's way, what it does is idol worshiping, because I become my own God. And that's the same. It doesn't matter what the reason, either because of I have pleasure I derive, either because I'm trying to get a shortcut to cheat in business so I can save a few dollars, either because everybody else, the herd, everyone else does it, so it's acceptable. It doesn't matter. If God said so, it means that it is not appropriate for us to live our life. I think I've spoken about, not this, I think in a JLI, about people who go to Kabbalists to discover the meaning of their names. And Shavuot, we had the discussion. Some people, before they get engaged, they go to a Kabbalist and they bring both names, the boy and the girl. And the Kabbalist, based on dissecting the Hebrew letter of their names, will be able to say the marriage would last, the marriage was not good for you. Perhaps there is some truth to it, I'm not denying. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe was vehemently, continuously, all along, was totally against that. And the Rebbe says that the Torah tells us, walk simply with God, which means pray to God and ask them what's the right thing to do, and that's what you're committing to do. God will take care of you. God will protect you. And therefore, to go and start digging into the names and digging in who is my great-grandfather and who is her great-great-mother, did they match? Did they come from the same town? Did they ever argue with each other? That has nothing to do with serving God. If I want to live a good life, it means serving God. If I want to serve God, I turn to God and says, look, I'm dating somebody. It looks like my match. She feels the same. I would like to do the right thing, assuming it's within the Torah law. If it's within the Torah confines, then we get married and we ask God. By the way, the idea of marriage is bringing God into my life. Otherwise, a male and female can agree to live together in a house on the same roof. The idea of marriage is to get God's blessing to make sure that they are living together. God's blessing appears only when we make a commitment to live in God's way. That's why a rabbi will not participate, someone with God-fearing, should not take part or participate in a marriage where God is not there, because then the idea of marriage does not exist. We bring in God to a place where God says, I'm not there. Back to our discussion, says the Rabbi, we're soon going to get later into what drives a man to doing it. What now the rabbi is saying is that when one sin, and it's almost a repeat of what we studied before, but it's from the point of view of the sin. When a man sin, what they do is they are worshiping an idol, because it's like a body part that aches, that wants to go on its own. My finger suddenly decide not to obey my brains and to do it slower, or not to open up and close one eye at will. We call it sick. There is an ailment. Needs attention. Needs to go to a doctor to be treated, because that's not the way the finger should operate. Me, I am a body part of God. You, each one of you, are part of God. And therefore, as soon as we disobey God, as soon as we do not follow in God's path, the way God wants, we are deviating, and therefore it's considered a spiritual idol worship. Now the rabbi is going to say that it goes even further. I'm going to share with you to introduce the idea. The rabbi is saying that when a man who has a free choice disobey God, he is worse than the klipa, than the shell, than the spirit of evil. Why? The spirit of evil acts in evil because God created it that way. If they will stop being evil and act in holiness and properly, they are not serving God. The human being, when they act in an evil way, it's their choice and not God's will. So comparing a human being to the spirit of evil, human being is way farther. There's a story to that for those who like stories. There was there are more than one story, but a very, very brief story. A man was hired as a bus driver, and he received his route every day. It's a 2-hour route. He has to do it, then do the route again. He has few stops. He has a route. And at the end of the route, he collected only $20. And when he goes into the comfort room or a room where they can take a break, those drivers, every circle he does, he gets like 20-minute break. His friend takes another route for 2 hours, and he makes $250 in that route because it's always overcrowded, always filled. So he figured maybe he didn't do a good job. The next morning, same story. They both leave at 7 o'clock. One takes one route. The other one, he takes the route on the right. And when they come back 2 hours later, this guy came back with $250 worth of tickets. He sold only $20 worth of tickets. So he became we call it in Hebrew, Iber Chacham, uber smart. He's smart above. So what does he do? He has to earn only also $250. And actually 2 hours later, the next day he comes back with $250. And the next day, $250. But the third day, the supervisor turned to him and says, we got so many complaints. People are waiting for the bus, and the bus did not show on your route. What happened? You skipped some stops? And he says, no. So he says, so what happens? How come we get calls that people waited for the bus and didn't arrive? He says, well, I figured, why am I going out on routes? To bring the manna, to bring money. My friend is earning $250 on his route. I get only $20. I figured that you'd be much happier if I bring $250. So in the last 2 days, I've taken the same route as my friend. And look. And the supervisor says to him, if you're not stupid, I would fire you. It's not about how you see it. It's about the task which you were sent for. So someone who was sent to take a route that is overcrowded, and they make $250 in worth of tickets in 2 hours. Another guy who was sent the opposite route, the opposite direction of town, and he's going to pick up only 20 passengers and bring back $20. But for the city to function with a good busing system, they must have all the routes intact. And if he's not going to do it, but do what he wants to get honored or get his cut or show that he has earned so much, he's actually hurting the entire system. The same is about us versus the evil spirit. The evil spirit who derives or drives the person to misobey, to sin, actually was tasked with that job. If the evil spirit will become holy, then the universe is incomplete. There is no actual balance because everything is holy. The evil is not there. They have their job. Are they going to be punished for making us sin? Are they going to be punished for being with us when we disobey God? Obviously not, because that's their job. But for a human being, when they disobey God, that's where we're going to be held accountable, and actually we are far from God. So if you put both, the human choosing to do bad, the evil force to do bad, they both are acting in inappropriate way, one is not going to be punished and actually was tasked to behave that way. The other made their own choice, and therefore they are farther removed from God lower meaning farther away from God than anything else. And that's what the rabbi is going to continue. Not only we are in the third paragraph on page 322. Not only are they united with the klipa and thus equal to it, but furthermore, they become secondary and subordinate to it and much lower and more debased than it. Why? For the klipa is not clothed in corporal body and hence is more exposed to the divine light. It knows its master and does not rebel against him, God forbid, by any independent act of sending its evil messengers other than in the service of God. In other words, the evil force is serving God. God created it for a purpose, and that's what they were tasked with their job. Any evil act of the Sitra Acha, of the evil spirit, is performed only in the service of God. Thus, the klipot that are not clothed in the body cannot rebel against God's will. Only the animal soul clothed in the human body and can do so. Hence, it is even lower than the klipa. So did Bilam say, I cannot violate the word of God. Although the klipot are called avodah zarah, idolatry, which is a denial of God, yet they refer to him as the God of gods, indicating that they do not deny him completely. And the rabbi will continue on to this point. Let me just share with you and explain what we just studied. Moses, the greatest of all prophets that gave us the Torah, the greatest talent, the greatest characteristic that defined Moshe is humility. The Torah tells us God himself testifies that he is more humble than all the men that live on the face of the earth. No one was as humble as Moshe, yet he reached higher than anybody else. No other prophet ever got close to Moshe. Who is the counterpart of Moshe? Bilam. Anybody not heard of Bilam? Everybody heard of Bilam? Good. Bilam was a non-Jewish evil prophet where God gave him equal power as Moshe. Bilam was able to talk to God at will, which is very unusual. All the other prophets cannot just call God and ask God. They only had to wait for God to appear whenever God wanted to send a message. Moshe is the exception, as in this week's Torah portion. People came complaining they could not bring the Passover sacrifice, and he said to them, stand up here and let me ask God. And Rashi, comment right away. He says, woe to a man who can tell someone, wait for me, let me go and ask God. Because all the prophets, Jeremiah, Hosea, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, only when God chose them to deliver a message, he came to them. They couldn't just turn to God and ask questions. Bilam was the exception. Bilam can talk to God whenever he wants. Bilam, all he was motivated was by greed and haughtiness. The Torah describes that when ministers came to try and convince him to travel to Balak and curse the Jewish people, he said, not enough, I need greater ministers, cabinet members, foreign minister, prime minister, I need the greatest ministers to come and beg me. Then he's talking about how much money he's going to get. And Bilam says, I need the house full of gold. He was demanding all for his own grandization. All he wanted is for himself. All he wanted is the honor. All he wanted is the money. Yet, when he's asked to curse God, the Jewish people, God says to them, do not curse them because they are blessed. Do you think that he changed his mind? The answer is no. 4 separate times, he was asking God against God's will, and God forced him to bless the Jewish people, the greatest of blessings. We're about to read them in about 4 weeks' time. Moshe, if it was Moshe, God says, do not curse them because they are blessed. Moshe would say, okay, so I will never try. Bilam kept trying. there is another part to the story of Bilam that is very fascinating. So first we see the dichotomy between Moshe and Bilam lived at the same time, also connected to God, the closeness to God equally. One was all about humility, as the Torah testifies, and the other is all about what's in it for me. One, when God said something, it's the way it's going to be, because I'm here to serve God. There is a chief, there is a leader, there is hierarchy, there is a purpose. I'm here to give, not to take. Bilam is all about what's in it for me. You didn't honor me enough. I need to make sure I get so much money. And therefore, when God says to him, don't go, God says to him, don't go because they're blessed. You don't go to curse them. He says, God, maybe I'll try again. And he's over and over and over. But there is something else. At the end, Bilam is successful. He is able to cause God's wrath to spread among the Jewish people. How? He tells Balak, the king of Moab, that God hates illicit relationship. And he said, send you young daughters, girls, to seduce the young men. And by doing so, God will get angry and kill them. You want to curse the Jewish people, right? You want them to be killed. That's the best thing to do. And actually, God's wrath is spreading. Many young men died until Pinchas comes and kills Zimri, the leader of the tribe of Simeon, and that's when it stopped. How many people died in that plague? 24,000 young men. Why? Because of Bilam. The Kabbalah asks, if God says to him, don't curse them, they're blessed. And he tried 4 times to curse them and he fails. And instead he blesses them. How is it possible that at the end he succeeded? At the end he succeeded. He killed 24,000 people. And you have to remember, biblical time, 24,000 mean today 50 million. Who knows how many? Because those over 3,300 years ago, 3,336, so 290 years ago, it was about, there would have been millions more. How come he succeeded? And the Kabbalah says that's the essence of what the rabbi is saying here. The evil force has no power of its own to disobey God. All they do is serve God. So God says to Bilam, don't curse. And therefore he blessed. And he tries again, and God says no, and no, and no. The only one who can disobey God, the only one who can anger God is the human being, the Jew. When we make the wrong choice, we are angering God. We can bring God's wrath. And that's what Bilam told Balak. Let the Jews themselves be cursed. You and I have no power to curse them because God don't want us to curse them. No matter how evil we are, we won't be able to. But when the Jews themselves curse themselves by acting inappropriately within the confines of God's path, they bring upon themselves the curse. So did Bilam succeed? Yes, he succeeded in cursing the Jewish people. But Bilam did not curse the Jewish people because God said to them, they are blessed, you won't be able to. Bilam was very smart, evil, sly, knowing exactly how to play the cards, making the Jew curse themselves, bring the curse on themselves without an outside force. And the idea the rabbi is saying here, you have a desire outside of yourself or within. A friend who says, come, let's have a drink, let's have fun. You have inside, someone says, you need to relax, go take a break. You can earn a bigger check if you are not doing everything kosher. Why only kosher? You can save money. You give half of it, you're going to give to tzedakah anyway. So you have, God will be pleased. Everyone else don't have the beak in the water, so to say, because they cannot disobey God. They can advise you, they can guide you, they can convince you, they can make you sense how pleasurable and how more money will get rid of all your trouble and all the people who call the creditors that chase you. It's all good and fine. They don't have their skin in the game because all they do is obey God. But when I choose to cheat, when I tell someone a lie, when I take a shortcut in business to earn more money, which is against God's will, I do have a skin in the game. I will pay very hefty price. What's the price I'm paying? Separating ourselves from God. But my friend who convinces me, or my evil desire who tells me it's the right thing, I guarantee you, do it once. You'll forget, you'll repay later on, you'll do so much good. That desire have no skin in the game. They don't disobey God. They actually follow the route like the bus driver that they're supposed to, even though they bring back only $20 versus $250. That's their task. Their job is to make me do it. When I do it and they are partners in the crime, they don't have a skin in the game, meaning that they are not going to be punished. They're not separated from God. They're still doing exactly what God said. I am the only one who is totally separated from God. And that's the point the Rabbi is saying, that when a man sins, they are worse than the evil itself, which is called evil because it's all about evil, but it's evil created by God for God, and therefore that's the only thing they're going to do. We spoke today in the Talmud class about making animal gore or kill a human, that animals will be put to trial for killing a person. By Jewish law, if an animal killed a person, they're going to be put to court, just like a human in Jewish law. A snake, a bear, a lion, a cow, a horse, a mule, you take them to court and you have to have testimony. And if they cause someone to die, they're going to be executed. But there is one exception, and that is if they were, what do you call it? When you make them
in unnatural habitat.
Not natural, but enticed. Enticed is provoked. If an animal is provoked to killing, you can't blame them. They did nothing wrong because that's their natural instinct, so to say. And I showed the example of Shamu. Shamu is a killer whale in SeaWorld, is taken out of the natural habitat. Many years back, it killed one of the trainers. And there was a whole discussion about what to do. Jewish law will dictate, according to Maimonides, that whenever an animal is out of the natural habitat, don't expect them to behave inappropriately, because that's the way they defend themselves. That's the way they are. In other words, when an animal kills, that's the way they are created. When a human, especially if they are provoked, when a human being acts in evil way, that's not their natural habitat. That's a choice they made, and therefore they're going to be accountable. So can I say, my father always cursed, therefore I can do it? The answer is no, it's not going to work. Can I say, my father told me that's the best way to make a living? You can't make a living unless you cheat? The answer is no, because we have our brains on top of our body to decipher right from wrong. And therefore, friends, natural instincts, I was born with this addiction, all that is good and fine. But at the end of the day, a choice is ours unless we're forced. And therefore, we are fully accountable. So somebody else, the evil forces doing the same exact thing, they're not going to be punishable. They're not going to be farther removed from God. But when a human being gets angry or makes the wrong choice, they are removed from God. Let's continue. So that's the idea of Bilam. Bilam himself couldn't do anything. But because he was so haughty, removed from God, he kept trying and trying and it failed. But he was able to convince the king to entice, to seduce the men, the Jewish men, and they themselves brought upon themselves God's anger. They cannot violate God's will. for they know and perceive that he is their life and sustenance, since they derive their nurture from the innermost aspect of the divine will which encompasses them. It is only the sustenance and life force that is within them, that is, the internal life force, which constitutes the identity of every created being, as explained in chapter 22, that is in a state of exile, so that they regard themselves as gods, which is a denial of God's unity. In other words, you can have many idols in town. The evil force is another God, opposite of God, my God. It's an idol. But they exist knowing that God is the source of their life. They exist just for the purpose of serving God. When I choose to become other God, an idol, when I disobey God, that's a different story. But they are not so completely heretical as to deny God and to assert that he does not exist. On the contrary, they regard him as the God of gods, recognizing that their life and existence ultimately derive from his will. Therefore, they never rebel against God's will. It follows then that the person who does violate God's will is greatly inferior to and more debased than the Sitra Achra and Klippa, which are called Avodah Zarah and other gods. Again, the rabbi makes the point that when you have the evil desire that drives me to disobey God, they are not removed from God. They are not disassociated from God. They know God and they serve in God. That's what they were created for. When I choose to do the same, I am separated from God. He is separated completely from God's unity and oneness even more than they are, as though denying his unity even more radically than they, God forbid. This is similar to that of to what is written in Rabbi Chaim, part 42, end of chapter 4, that the evil in these corporal worlds is the dregs of the coarse klipot. It is a sediment of the purifying process and so on. We're not going to talk about that. This is pure Kabbalah. But what the rabbi is saying is that there are many, many gods. And they accept God as their God. In other words, they serve God by their evil desire activity. When a Jew chooses to misbehave, disobey God, and a Gentile as well, non-Jew as well, what they do is they are far, far removed from God. They severing their ties with God and creating their own godly, becoming their own idol. We will stop right here, and that is next week, God willing, we're going to talk about what causes a person to do it. Where does it come from, the desire to do evil? Thank you, everybody.
No, just a little, more say what you want to talk about there.